Okay, welcome. Today we are going to be talking about companies, right? The area that we are going to focus on is the issue of shares. So with this video, we want to understand as to when a company issues shares, right? How do we then record the transaction of the issue of shares for a company? So that's what we are going to do. How do you represent that in the accounting language, right? So as you know that when the company issues shares, it means that they want to raise capital. So then the transaction will then go as follows: that you'd have a company, right? And then this company, when it wants to raise capital, so when it wants to get money, right, to fund its operations, they are going to sell a certain piece of paper. This piece of paper is going to be sold to who? It's going to be sold to investors. And then in turn, these investors, they pay the company for this portion of ownership, right? So it's like the company sells a portion of ownership to investors, and in return for this, the investors will then pay the company money, right? That's the whole idea behind the issue of shares. So companies issue shares so that they can raise capital, and as you know, that capital is used to fund operations, right? So if you think about the process of issuing shares, right, there's certain things that the company will do to issue shares to the public, right? First of all, you know that when a company is incorporated, when the company started, you need certain things, right? First of all, you need to register with CIPC, right? So the company would have to register with CIPC, right? And then upon registration as well, you need to submit documents such as the memorandum of incorporation. So the memorandum of incorporation is a founding document of the company, or is a constitution of the company that details things such as the responsibilities, right? The responsibilities, the rights, the duties, right? The duties of the company, etc., right? Among those things as well is that the constitution or the memorandum of incorporation will talk about something called authorized shares, right? So in simple terms, authorized shares is the maximum number of shares, right? Is the maximum number of shares that the company is allowed to sell to the public, right? So this is the cap. So the memorandum of incorporation is going to detail in as far as it's to how much shares is the company allowed to sell to the public. So if then the authorized share capital is 2 million, that means that when the company issues new shares, it cannot exceed 2 million, or the cap of 2 million. So that's the idea behind authorized share capital, right? It's stated on the memorandum of incorporation the maximum number of shares. So this is very important as well. And then on the other hand, issued share capital, this is the shares that are actually sold to the public, right? Or this is the capital that is raised from the shares that is actually sold to the public, right? That's the issued share capital. So authorized share capital is the maximum number of shares that the company is allowed to issue. And then the issued share capital is the actual shares that are issued to the public. That's the difference, right? So when the company issues new shares, that's going to be the issued share capital, right? So it's very important for you to understand the difference then between between authorized share capital and issued share capital. It's very important, right? So this is the actual shares issued, and then authorized share capital is the maximum number of shares that the company is allowed to issue, right? So the company can then issue, talking about issuing shares, the company can issue different types of shares, right? The company can issue the different types of shares. There's preference share capital, and then there's ordinary share capital. So preference shares and ordinary shares. Preference shares, these shares or these shareholders, they are entitled to a particular percentage, right? They can say it's 12%. They are entitled to a particular percentage every year, right? From the company, right? Whether the company generates a profit or not, these shareholders, they are entitled to a particular percentage of the return of the company based on the amount of shares that they bought in the company. That's the preference shares capital, right? So these shareholders, that's the advantage, is that whether the company generates a profit or not, these shareholders will get paid by the company. But on the other hand, these shareholders cannot vote, right? It means that they don't necessarily have power to steer the direction of the company. And then on the other hand, the ordinary shareholders, they may or may not get paid by the company, right? So what they get is what is called dividends, which is that when a company has generated profit for a particular year, right, a share of those profits might be allocated to the shareholders who own ordinary shares. But it is the directors of the company that decide whether or not the company is going to pay ordinary shareholders, right? The advantage of this, even if they may or may not receive a return of the profits of the company, the advantage is that these shareholders, they can vote, right? They can vote. It means that they have power. So that is very important. It's very important that you understand the difference between these two types of shares, and then you understand what is authorized share capital, what is issued share capital. It's very important. So when a company decides then to issue new shares, there's a process that then they would follow. It's similar to when you're applying to go to university, right? First of all, when the company wants to issue new shares, they are going to come up with a document called a prospectus, right? So this document is going to really advertise the company, just talk about what the company is about, what do they do, or how much branches do they have, if there's any, all those things. It's typically to advertise the company, just like before you applied at the university, you had to go through their prospectus to see where is the university located, how many courses are there, which courses are there, all those things. So it's just meant to advertise to the person who's interested, right? So these prospectus will be published, and then potential investors or really people who are interested in buying the shares in the company will then go through this prospectus, and if they are happy with what they see, and also after maybe they have done their own research, they will then decide to buy shares in the company, right? So they will then decide to buy shares in the company. So when they buy these shares, what they will do is that they will fill in maybe an application form online, right? So online, maybe there would be an application form, and then when they submit this application form, they would also submit the payment, right? To say, okay, they would then submit the payment, which is going to represent and the shares that they want to buy, right? So this can be reflected in journals, right? So when a person is interested in buying the shares, there's going to be a journal that we call the application journal, right? So that means that the company, when it receives this payment from the potential investor, they debit bank because they have received money. So bank SFP, and then they are going to credit an account called application and allotment, right? Application and allotment, right, of it can be ordinary share capital if the company was selling ordinary shares, right? If the company was selling preference shares, it can be preference share capital, and then you are going to credit this account. So let me just take some few minutes to just quickly talk about this account, right? So this account is a liability, right? So why is it a liability? It's because after the potential investors have submitted the application form and the payment, right, it is the responsibility of the directors to allocate the shares to these people who have applied to buy shares in the company, right? Just like after you have applied maybe at a particular university and have paid the application fee, it is the university that is then going to decide on whether or not to allocate space for you, right? So that's the same idea here. So it means that in this case then, the directors of the company, they have what? They have an obligation to allocate the shares, right, to these potential investors, right? So here you are simply recording the application to say, I have received money, right, from these potential investors who are interested in buying the shares in the company, right? So as directors, I have an obligation. Remember, in accounting, a liability is an obligation or is a responsibility. So in this case, you are saying, as a company, we have the obligation to allocate the shares to these potential investors, right? So that is why this account is a liability. It's a current liability because at this point, the company or the directors of the company have the obligation of allocating the shares to these investors who are interested, right? So that means that then the second journal after this journal, right, then the directors would allocate the shares, right? After you have applied for the shares, the directors are going to decide to allocate the shares to you, right? So when they then decide to allocate these shares, you are going to debit this liability. So in other words, you are going to cancel out or derecognize this liability to say, if then the company or the directors are allocating these shares, that means that they no longer have the responsibility to allocate these shares. So that's why you are going to debit application and allotment of ordinary share capital. So you are saying they no longer have the responsibility. Why? Because they are allocating these shares to ordinary share capital, right? So this is the journal then that would transpire from the company issuing new shares to the public, right? So you are going to debit bank and credit application and allotment depending on the type of shares, ordinary or preference shares, right? And then you are then going to debit the application and allotment of ordinary share capital, which is a current liability. So you are saying, now I'm recognizing this current liability because I'm allocating these shares, right? So this is the allocation journal, right? So different things can happen, right, when the company issues shares, right? So you'd find that the company would have a target to say, we want maybe to raise 2 million by selling, let's say, 1 million shares, right? So they would sell 1 million shares to raise 2 million. So what would happen is that the company can raise exactly the 2 million. So if it raises exactly the 2 million, right, from the applicants, you simply debit this account with 2 million, credit this one with 2 million, and then here you debit the application and allotment with 2 million, and then credit the ordinary share capital with 2 million, right? This is when now the amount received from the applicants is equals to the the capital that they wanted to raise, which was the target, right? This is very easy, right? Sometimes, right, you'd find that the company is going to say we want to raise 2 million, but they get, let's say for an example, 3 million from the public, right? So the target here was to raise 2 million by selling 1 million shares, right? And then what they get from the applicants is 3 million, right? So in this case, that simply means that the amount that they've raised from the public is more than whatever that they wanted to raise, which was the target of 2 million. So the surplus funds, you are going to have to refund them back to these applicants. So here you are still going to debit bank, right, with 3 million, because that's the amount that you've received. Credit application and enrollment with 3 million. Then here you'll say 3 million debit application and enrollment, and then credit ordinary share capital with 3 million. Sorry, not with 3 million, with 2 million, right? Here you are going to recognize, or you are going to record the amount that you were targeting, which is the capital that you wanted to raise, which is the 2 million, right? So that means that the 1 million, you have to refund it back to the share, to the potential shareholders. So you wanted to raise 2 million, but you received 3 million, right? So we'll still record the 3 million and then allocate the target to ordinary share capital, and then refund, right? Refund the surplus back to the applicants. So that is what is going to happen when you raise an amount that is more than the one that you wanted to raise from the public. When the amount that you've received from the applications is more than the amount that you wanted to raise, which is your goal, right? So that is what is going to happen. But there are cases as well whereby, right, there are cases as well whereby the amount that you get from the applications is less than what you wanted to raise from the public. Let's say you wanted to raise 2 million, right, but you end up getting 1.5 million from the public, right? There is a scenario like this, and there is a way as well to record such, right? So you'd agree with me that when the company wants to sell shares to the public, it's not their main operating activity. It's not why they exist. They're not in the business of buying and selling shares, right? Find maybe a company, they are selling maybe food, or they're in the retail space, but they want to raise capital. So what they would then do is that they would go to companies that are underwriters, or they would seek the services of what is called an underwriter, right? So the underwriter, they do two things, right? They help the company to sell the shares, right? They help the company to sell the shares to the public, right? So it means that they are the one who are going to structure now the deal, right, of selling the shares to the public. They would come up with the price, they would assess the risk, they would advertise the shares on behalf of the company and all those things. So it means that they outsource the services, right, of selling the shares to the public to an underwriter, right? So for this, the underwriter is going to charge the company a commission, right, which is going to be the expense on the company, right? So that means that when the underwriter charges the company a commission, right, when the underwriter charges the company a commission, you'll debit the commission, right? You'll debit the commission, right? SPL. This comes from this goes to the statement of profit or loss. Why? Because it is an expense. Most of the time, this expense is paid for on credit, right? It's going to be debit commission and then credit the payable, right? In this case, the payable is the underwriter, right? So it means that you are going to be owing the underwriter. Why are you owing the underwriter? You are owing the underwriter because they provided services to you. So in this case, the underwriter is going to be some sort of a payable, right? A payable. So the commission most of the time is calculated. This is where you need to listen. So the commission amount is calculated based on the target, right? The targeted share capital, right? So we'll say the share capital that the company wanted to raise multiplied by the commission percentage, right? They'll give you this percentage to say that they charge maybe 5% commission. So you take the target, which is what they wanted to raise, not what they received from the public. So here they wanted to raise 2 million. So when you calculate the commission, you'll say 2 million times 5%, right? Which is going to be how much? 2 million times 5%, I think it's 50,000, right? So that would be the commission here, right? This is how you calculate the commission, guys. Don't be confused here, right? So in this case, this commission is an expense, and then it means that we are going to be owing the underwriter, right? Whatever amount they are charging us for their services. But the underwriter, now this is where it gets interesting. The underwriter does not only help the company to sell shares, right? They also guarantee to buy the rest of the shares should the company not sell all the shares to the public. So should they fail to raise the capital that the company wants to raise, should they fail to raise the 2 million, right? The underwriter, they then guarantee to buy the rest of the shares, right? So they guarantee to buy the rest of the shares. So if in this case we wanted to raise 2 million, but we end up receiving applicants that make up 1.5 million, the underwriter has the obligation, so they have the responsibility to buy the rest of the shares, right? So they have the responsibility then to buy the other shares that are worth 500,000 here. Why? Because it's part of the deal, right? So they have the responsibility to buy the rest of the shares. That means that we are entitled to, right? We are entitled to the 500,000 from them because they are the ones who promised to buy the rest of the shares should they not raise the capital that we wanted to raise. So in that case, we have a receivable, right? So it means that the rest of the capital is going to be receivable from the underwriter. So you need to record that, right? So that means that you are going to debit the underwriter. In this case, the underwriter is a what? Is a receivable, because we are entitled to receiving the rest of the ordinary share capital from them. So you debit the underwriter and then you credit ordinary share capital. If it's ordinary share capital, if it's preference share capital, you credit preference share capital, right? Share capital. So in this case, it's going to be 500,000. 500,000. Can you see? So they guarantee, they promise to buy the rest of the shares if they don't sell all the shares to the public. And then in this case, we'll go back to say that the commission here is 5%. So when you calculate the commission, you'll say, okay, the target was 2 million multiplied by 5%, right? And then 2 million times 5% is going to be how much? 2 million times 10% is 100,000, right? 100,000. No, it's 20,000. Wait, guys. 2 million times 10% is 200,000. Sorry. Then 200,000 divided by 2, which is 5%. It's going to be 100,000 here. So it's going to be 100,000 commission, right? So at this point, that means that we are owing the underwriter 100,000, right? But they are owing us 500,000, right? So when they pay, they are not going to pay the 500,000 and then we pay them the 100,000. It doesn't make sense, right? So when they pay, they are going to pay the difference of what they are owing us. So if you say 500 less 100,000, that means that they are going to pay how much? They are going to pay us 400,000 when they pay. So when you de-recognize this receivable, right, you are going to say, okay, I'm going to, when they pay, the 500,000, you are going to debit bank, right, which is SFP, and then credit what? Credit the receivable. They are no longer owing us, right? You credit the receivable, right? Underwriter. So here you write the name of the underwriter, guys. Right? They will give you the name of the underwriter. You write there. If the name of the underwriter is Madluputu Underwriters, you write there Madluputu Underwriters, Madluputu Underwriters, Madluputu Underwriters, kanjalo kanjalo. So how much will they pay us, right? We owe them 100,000, they owe us for 500,000. So what they will pay is the difference, which is 400,000, right? This is how you navigate around this study unit. Please, guys, if you have any other topic that you want me to cover, please you can write that on the comment section. Please share this with your friends and colleagues, guys. Let us try to grow this channel. I'm going to be uploading more videos, especially for accounting 2 that is done second year, right? So next year I'll try to push as well for us to have both the videos for accounting 1 and accounting 2, so that we make your journey in as far as accounting is concerned as seamless as possible, right? Please like this video. Please share this video with your friends. Thank you very much.